Phil, Peter, and Richard are from the Birds side of the concert. So we will perhaps we'll introduce you when at the appropriate entrance, if I may suggest so, if it's fine for everyone. And let me first welcome Joe Hindley, please, because it's a great opportunity for us, it's a great pleasure, this event. And your father in the 70s in Cambridge used a tape recorder. Later in the 80s, a personal computer and a keyboard and the notation software to transpose and to record Birds' songs into notation to make them audible for us, for human ears, right? And so, retrospectively, what would you see were your father's drive and guiding principles?
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here and lovely to see so many people in the audience. It's just fantastic. And thank you, Stefan. So my dad was for 25 years lecturer in music at Homerton College in Cambridge. So he then retired, took early retirement to what he called to decompose, he said. He said, but really it was to dedicate his time to doing more composition. He had been composing all his life, but at that stage he had recently discovered, really, like you say, especially walking on the Roman Road, which is just skirts Cambridge, where there are lots of skylarks that sing and soar high into the sky. And he experimented with slowing down the recorded songs of the skylarks, using a big reel-to-reel tape recorder player. So he slowed it down 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, up to 16 times, and that way he could hear each individual note and came to notate the song of the skylark, discovering that the skylark sang 230 notes per second. So really he was searching for his musical muse for a very long time and finally found it in the skylark. And then that led on to him researching and slowing down the songs of other birds too, to discover their very, very, hidden from our ears, their very distinctive morphology, musicality, and the creativity that the birds use to create their songs. So most of what we hear, most of what the skylark sings we can't hear, because it's out of our range of hearing, above the top note of the piano, and also falls between the cracks between notes in the piano, because they're sort of microtones and all the rest. But it was a fascinating process. We grew up, my sister and I, hearing all these sort of slowed down bird sounds in the house. It was sort of lulled us to sleep at night. But this was a project that went on particularly in the 90s, once Dad had retired.
So your dad has been composing before as well?
Yes, he studied music at, he was a pianist and an organist, and he studied music at Oxford, and he had a symphony performed in the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford in 1956, which was quite a thing. He was contemporary with Todd Handley, who was the conductor who was studied under Sir Adrian Boult. They were both contemporary at Oxford together, so Hindley and Handley had great fun together, and did performances at the concert places in Oxford.
So when you say muse, it was a conscious step to developing the area, really how to compose, and also as well what to compose.
Yeah, I think for a long, Dad had done a lot of church music and music for his students when he was teaching in schools, and obviously teaching at Homerton. He came to the birds, really, sorry, what did you say again? I went a little bit mental blank there.
How you
yes,
retrospectively would have perceived his development as a composer, or has his ambition also to widen what music is?
Yes, so he had worked with folk tunes as well, a bit like Bartok did, actually taking folk tunes and using those as a basis for composition. But yes, he was always very much exploring what is music and challenging what is music, and he was a great champion of John Cage and composers like that. And he would argue very much, very much that the bird song is music. That's been contentious for a while, but maybe it's not so much now as we start to be a bit less human-centric and can appreciate other species more. But
that's thank you. This is exactly the point where we can bring in bird experts, isn't it? As far as I'm concerned, bird songs are for signaling, right? Like for marking territory, for impressing mate, for reproductional purposes, perhaps distracting aggressors. Anything else, really, Peter?
Well, I think it should be realised that birds that sing to attract a mate are usually those that cannot signal with colourful feathers or displays. They often live in dense habitats. If you think of the nightingale, which is a small, rather dull brown bird, which has a fabulous song, it lives in dense scrub, and so to reach its audience, both other males that it wants to warn off, and for females to attract, it sings an interesting song. And it's the selection by the females which fine-tunes that song, and their choices by natural selection cause the song to get ever more elaborate. Other birds that sing very well are those in wide open spaces like skylarks and and of course the skylark will fly up high in the sky to broadcast as widely as it can, pouring out a stream of notes, and this has inspired many poets, and I've got a small snatch of a poem by George Meredith, which I'll just read you. I think you might like it. He rises and begins to round. He drops the silver chain of sound of many links without a break, in chirrup, whistle, slur and shake, all intervolved and spreading wide, like water dimples down a tide, where ripple overcurls and eddy into eddy whirls. So it's all about impressing other males that I'm a vigorous inhabitant of this patch of moorland or farmland, and about attracting the females, saying, I can stay up high in the sky, beating my wings and singing loudly, so I must be a very good potential mate.
Anything else to add, Phil? Richard?
No, I was just going to say they are still a comparatively common bird, skylarks. There's some fairly depressing statistics about some of the other birds, but in the Midlands there are still quite a lot of skylarks. If you go into the Warwickshire countryside, round Coles Hill, Maxstoke, where I used to live, you can hear skylarks. Interestingly enough, the local bird report says there are a lot of skylarks at Coventry Airport. There aren't many planes at Coventry Airport nowadays, and Birmingham Airport, near where I used to live. Skylarks, as well described there for their flight song and everything else, are fairly common feature in our area in the Midlands.
What are we talking about when we talk about extinction?
So I'm a birder. I spend quite a lot of time out in the field, and I'm sure many people do that. But I'm not the kind of birder that takes lists or counts birds or things like that. I regard myself as an emotional birder, so the song for me is highly important. I think we need to be aware that we are in the middle of a sixth extinction at the moment, and so the whilst birds may be locally abundant, overall they're horrifically threatened. And say farmland birds, I believe the facts I've just checked before I came in here, farmland birds have declined by 65% in the last 30 or 40 years, and woodland birds have declined by 35%. We can't listen to this music without keeping that in our minds. Nightingales have declined by 90% and skylarks by 11% in this country. Woodlark have actually increased, but that's from a very low base of about 200 miles. So I think, what does extinction mean? I read a poem once, I can't remember what it on me, but I read a poem once, and it was about a different bird called curlew, and it was a bird I can't imagine a world without curlews, but I can imagine listening to the very last curlew. Can you imagine listening to the last skylark? Or the last nightingale? What would it sound like? It would be horrendous, wouldn't it? And can you imagine if we don't have skylarks and woodlark and nightingale and all we've got is the music? And that would be horrendous. So for me, that's what extinction means. That's why. Can you imagine? I mean, the music is beautiful and lovely and a treasure in its own right. But without the birds, it's nothing. Without the birds, it's absolutely nothing. That's why I'm a campaigner. That's why I campaign terrifically hard to preserve nature and the environment in general from all the threats that it and we face in the coming future. So for me, that's what extinction means. It means we've got the music, we haven't got the birds, and I'm dreadfully sorry if we haven't got the birds. Everything is diminished.
Joe, perhaps you can pass on. Thank you for sharing this. I get from you that proceedings of the rights go to, of your father's music, go to music declares emergency. How's that development been? Is it something you have arranged?
Yeah, I initiated that. I felt that I didn't want to be profiting from Dad's music. I think really, Dad composed this music for the joy of it and for what Phil's described about the importance of appreciating these songs and what they mean. And Dad was very, even in the time, the 80s and the 90s, so he was well ahead of most of us appreciating the impact of extinction. He was very, very well aware at that time that the skylark was threatened. It's now actually on the red list for extinction, for threatened birds, as is the nightingale, as is the cuckoo that Dad composed as well. So it's just trying to raise awareness, and I think if Dad's music can help with just helping people get in touch emotionally and spiritually, audibly, in every aspect of our being, to appreciate that we are not the only species on the planet, we depend on interspecies. There are a couple of words that I think are really key to talking about Dad's music here. We've touched on some of them, saying the bird is here and the music there. Dad was in a crossover exploration between the birds and the music, and at the time, there is now a sort of study of ornithomusicology or zoomusicology, the study of music created by animals or birds. So Dad was a ornithomusicologist back at the time, and now that's in being. But at the time, those sorts of areas of awareness and study were very separate. And then another word that's very contemporary, more and more so now, is intersectionality. So that intersection between those two areas of study and the intersection between humans and the rest of the species, we can't see each other and we can't see ourselves in isolation from nature anymore. Dad was a great appreciator. If anybody's read here, I think poetry and music really help us get in touch with the spirit of our time, which is a very serious and spiritually challenging time, with this time of threatening, of extinction, living through it as it happens.
And David Hindley has been commissioned by transforming the song of the dodo, which had been extinct far longer than we all have lived, into music. And we will hear that, we're going to hear that in the concert, not played by you, because it's for electronic music. He stuck that to electronic means, right?
Well, Dad actually created all this music for electronic, was created all to be electronically performed, because until we met Rolf, there was no pianist who was up for performance of these very challenging pieces. So that's been partly the delight of this latter day bit of the journey, with this whole bit of bringing this music to performance. But in Dad's own lifetime, there was only ever you could only ever appreciate an electronic performance of his work. And so, that was the case for the pieces that we're going to hear Rolf play today. But also then Dad he was commissioned by BirdLife International in the 90s to contribute to recreate the song of actually the huia, which is a New Zealand bird that was hunted, and not just hunted to extinction, but it was really the effect of colonialism that brought that about, of destruction of habitat, of bringing in cats and dogs, which are outside predators, and the rest. But what happened to the huia in New Zealand happened to the dodo in Mauritius back in the 17th century. So BirdLife International produced this whole CD of extinct and threatened birds, and it's he contributed that bit. But then on the back of that, he was then invited by the Natural History Programme for the Really Wild show, and actually he was there with the early Chris Packham on one of the Really Wild shows talking about extinction in the early 90s. So Dad recreated imaginatively, because there is no recording. With the huia, there was a whistled recording of a Maori Indigenous New Zealand person whistling the song of the huia, which Dad used to create the huia, but there was no such sort of relic to explore for the dodo. So the dodo is part of the pigeon and dove family, so the Barbary dove, and it's like a really big pigeon, and it was a really big bird, and it was a really trusting bird that had no predators on Mauritius until the predators came, and would just lay its egg in the open and just sit upon it and just wouldn't run away. But it was completely wiped out. So it's, people laugh about the dodo, and even the Latin name is so Didus ineptus. It's just so insulting for the poor old dodo. But anyway, I think Dad's done a really good job with creating the song, and I think part of it you'll hear when you hear it. It's also, it had a very big beat that it used to use and clatter against rocks, so it's a percussive as well as a whistling, cooing.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something else about extinction. It's not just about the bird becoming extinct completely, it's becoming extinct locally, which impoverishes the lives of the people who might experience hearing those birds or seeing them. And what is very worrying is that people become used to the status of how things are as they experience them. They don't know what it was like back in the 1930s, say, or whatever, when the countryside was alive with birdsong. I mean, I come from the New Forest, and you can walk through the woods there sometimes in the spring, and it's much quieter than it was even 10 years ago.
Mm.
So local extinction is a great loss to us.
Can I just amplify that? Because I think there's some really interesting concepts that we're starting to get names for, and we're so slow with this, but when we have a name for something that happens, it's really helpful. So what you've described, people are talking about is the shifting baseline syndrome, this sense that, and it's also a term of environmental generational amnesia, this sense that between generations we forget what it was like before. Or, my mother-in-law here is in her 90s, she can remember the wealth of cowslips or of bird, the dawn chorus or whatever it was. We can't appreciate, we haven't got that anymore. So these words are really important for naming this loss that we're experiencing. We become accustomed to the new normal, and we don't notice the incremental gradual accumulation of this loss. When we had a concert when Rolf first privately performed these pieces, which was a memorial concert for my dad, because he suffered from dementia in his latter years, and I very much I was very acutely struck by this analogy of witnessing Dad's deterioration with dementia over a period of about 7 years, that paralleled really what we're witnessing with the deterioration of nature at this time. So this gradual, progressive, daily sense of loss and falling away of ecosystems, and I sort of perceive my dad as a complete ecosystem who disintegrated really, and I'm not the only person in this room at all who's been affected by losing parents or relatives with dementia, and I'm very acutely aware that this is Father's Day today, and lots of us who've lost our fathers, it's a very special time to be just coming together to just find some sense of wonder and love in loss as well.
Thank you for these words. Thank you for cueing Rolf. Rolf, thank you for your patience so far. You met this sort of music, and for you, it's not. You don't need to stand on your head to perform this music. It is just music, isn't it?
It's been very interesting listening to everyone else's contributions and wondering what an authentic response is. It is indeed just music, and it's just a piano, which, as Joe outlined at the beginning, can scarcely do justice to the actual pitches that birds sing at, i.e. they sing a lot higher. So obviously David, your father, made decisions, and the piece is, I was thinking about what you said about the emotion of it and where I fit into it. The piece is about a man's relationship with the things he hears, because he's making choices and he's sending us a message, as all composition is, and sometimes incredibly moving when you suddenly realise, this was actually happening 200 years ago, or in this case 40 years ago, and that world has changed. And there is this specific relationship with the material which he is choosing. The thing I wanted to say, I'm playing one piece by Olivier Messiaen, who is the famous composer of bird-related music before David Hindley appeared on the scene, who also collected and manually wrote down birdsong throughout France in the 1950s, and there's hours and hours and hours of birdsong-related music by Messiaen, including the one piece I'm going to play today, which happens to be also the woodlark, so we put it in the programme for comparison, which
which is part of a set of 15 pieces called Catalogue of Birds, which last 2.5 hours altogether, but that doesn't even scratch the surface of the beautiful pieces. But it's very interesting to see when you hear that piece how different it is. Like they may be listening to the same thing, but because they're having to transfer it to a piano or to tape originally, but still to an audible pitch for us, decisions are being made. The birdsong has to be framed in some way. What's interesting to me about David's choices is he tries to be possibly even more literal than Messiaen by choosing a particular length of birdsong, slowing it down and just using that as the structure of the piece. And it's kind of amazing when you hear them slow down how structured they are. You really do hear this kind of genius going on of intuition and if I was tempted, it might make me believe in God. That kind of extraordinary muscle memory and range and creativity. What was the question?
You're very close. It's music.
Yeah, it's music, and it is very hard, and for me it's been very exciting to be part of the process because the scores were kind of study scores that you might look at when you listen to a tape recording. They were very, very hard to play on the piano, so they have been edited, and there are beautiful scores outside. If any of you are pianists, please have a look. Or any of you playing brass ensembles, please have a look. And that process of bringing them to life and into a concert setting like this, I think it's actually really important, and it does speak to what you're saying about emotion. You have a snapshot of one man's relationship with something incredibly important in his life, which he, as I understand it, revised to really get it right, to try and find the right setting for the birds and the way it worked. That's everything.
So thank you so much. So there is, and David Hindley has hinted at it, there is a parallel in compositional technique and what the birds are doing. Well, it is certainly in our ears. Yes, and I wanted to come back to this question because we have experienced the recent behavioral findings and with other species. So is there room for birds singing for the fun of it?
Well, that's a difficult one. It's very hard to get into the mind of any other animal than ourselves. Certainly there seems to be joy in the lives of some more advanced species, if you could phrase it that way. You can see a smile on the face of a chimpanzee, and you can certainly get a certain sense of humour out of certain parrots, I think. Slightly straying from the question, I just want to talk a little bit about how songbirds make the sounds that they make, because it's rather different from the way that we make sounds. Mammals have, this is going to be, I'm pushing my luck here because I'm no expert, but mammals have their vocal cords in the top of their breathing apparatus. Birds have, songbirds have what's called a syrinx further down the bronchus, where it splits into two. And the syrinx is in two parts, and the bird can control membranes within those tubes called tympani, which it can stretch or compress with various muscles. And it can work on these two different tubes simultaneously and differently. And one can be modulated and one not. They can actually sing different tunes out of each of these tunes. So a very complex sound can be made. And there's also the question, which has been mentioned, of the rapidity of the songs. Birds, some small birds, may be operating on a different time scale to us. Their second may be a minute to them. They have shorter lives. They have a lot to do. They have a higher metabolic rate. They have a higher blood temperature than us, by about 3 degrees. And they need a great deal of oxygen to have a more efficient respiratory system for flight. And so they're charging around, taking in food all the time to keep up with their metabolic rate, and living a very fast life. And they may be able to perceive this torrent of notes in a way that we can't.
Thank you. I'm a bit aware of time. May I ask you to just give us your background? Sure.
Well, I actually was a great friend and still am, I hope, with John Christopher's way back as a child. And amazingly, I have Hindley ancestry as well, but we're not sure if it's the same Hindleys. But I studied biology, and then I worked in the RSPB film unit, making natural history films, and worked for various people. Just once with Sir David Attenborough. Anyhow, but natural history. I did back in 1998. I interviewed David Hindley in Cambridge. We were going to film him for Reader's Digest, or we did film him, but the piece wasn't used ultimately. It's actually rather difficult to illustrate the subject that we're talking about visually, and that was our problem.
Thank you. This was also to make sure there are a lot of subsections of the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, right? And everybody can engage in, everybody can make contact very easily with them. Richard?
I remember the RSPB, and I remember as a child, every year in Winchester Guildhall, they used to show the RSPB films. The world has moved on so much now with television and satellite channels and everything else. But my interest in birds is purely from being a child, and so much we've talked about today. I remember so many more birds singing dawn chorus. I remember birds like turtle doves and cuckoos and that being corn buntings, being within a few miles of my house. Now you wouldn't find any of those probably, even down in Hampshire. So I was just a keen bird watcher, young ornithologist club, which is the RSPB, and I've not worked in bird conservation or anything like that. Since I've retired, I've done a lot more work as a volunteer at bird reserves, such as the Lady Walk Bird Reserve, which is run by West Midland Bird Club, which is just north of Coleshill. So I kind of manage what goes on there, but it's purely as a hobby. Although my wife will probably say it's gone a bit too far at times.
Let's not go too far with this talk. Phil, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. I was brought up a birder with my dad. My dad was a very keen birder, and I remember coming all the way around, and I remember seeing flocks of yellowhammer and things like that you just don't see these days. And I went away from birding when I was in my 20s, and then gradually came back, and it's gradually overtaken my life. And now I live on the North Kent Marshes. I live at Faversham, nearly all, and I bird all the way along the Thames Estuary and all through the North Downs. So I get plenty of opportunity to hear these birds. I still quite regularly hear nightingales. I heard nightingales last Sunday afternoon as it goes. And so, yeah, it's just, for me, it's an experiential thing, but it's also I think it would be fair to say that birds have changed my life, transformed my life. They're my spur. They make me go forward and do other things, and then I come back, and I want to say they're always there, but they're not. Yeah, they're not always there, and sometimes I just sit down and I cry because it's so serious. It's really serious. So we've got to take that, and yeah. So that's my background in birding, I'm afraid. I wish it was better, but it isn't. And we've got to name it before we can do something about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks everybody for sharing this pre-concert event. Thank Rolf, in particular, for your patience, and we can't wait to actually hear it. Thank you.